Good afternoon, everyone. I am happy to be back with you all, especially during May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. And today we'll be talking about stronger than stress, building everyday resilience. So, first, I'll just start with sharing a little bit about me. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in the field more than 15 years. I have a special passion for psychoeducation and public speaking. And one of the reasons that I value that work is because in individual therapy, I'm reaching one person, but when I do a webinar or a presentation or a corporate psychoeducation, then I'm able to reach the mass. And so that work is very dear to me. I'm also an advanced EMDR therapist, which is a form of therapy that targets trauma. And one of my favorite modalities is sand tray therapy. And sand tray therapy is where I have a big sand tray and it allows people to play and express themselves and process things non-verbally, but using sand and miniatures. It's really fun and it's neat to see how people learn and grow and change by playing, which is something that we don't do often when we become adults. My personal motto is that healthy individuals create healthy communities. So my passion for mental health is to just create healthier communities. So my objectives for you today, I want to educate, I want to empower, I want to encourage you all to think about where you can make small changes in your daily lives and your daily routines. Give you permission to prioritize yourselves. What I know is there's a lot going on in the world right now, and no matter if people are expressing it or not, everyone is dealing with something. Everyone is carrying something, everyone is managing something. And many people are under-resourced or don't have the tools to be able to navigate some of the things that they are encountering. And so that's the point of this work is to be able to give practical tools to empower you all to make changes, to encourage you all to take better care of yourself. So I'll just provide a little bit of psychoeducation on mental health. We hear this word and it has become a more popular buzzword. I'm happy to see that we are placing more of a value on mental health, but our mental health, it is really how we think, how we feel. It impacts how we make decisions, how we handle stress, how we relate to others. Um, Mental health, as I like to say, is a part of physical health. One of the things that people like to think is that either you're struggling with mental health or you're completely healthy. And what I like to do is view mental health on a spectrum. You're not healthy or sick, but there is a spectrum of mental health, and it's always changing, it's always moving. One thing in the day can change how your emotional wellness is going or how it's faring. So it's definitely a continuum. It's not just a black and white thing as far as either you are or you aren't, but it's a spectrum. And I'll talk more about that spectrum. When we think about stress and managing stress and resilience, I think it's important to accept that some days we will feel like we're thriving and some days we will just be managing and things will happen and we'll be struggling and we have to acknowledge that. And then sometimes we are in crisis. And each of these levels of the spectrum require something different. When you're thriving, then you're trying to maintain that mode. So what's working? You want to maintain that, you want to keep doing it. If you're thriving, great. That's whatever you're doing, keep putting that in place to manage that mode. Managing Managing is good. It's definitely not bad. You're coping, and maybe there is a stressor, but you are trying to use your tools, relying on your support system, navigating things as best as you can. Managing and thriving feel a little bit different. I often like to think that if I won the lottery, I would be thriving. I was having that conversation with the client earlier. And maybe not. There are all kind of horror stories about people who win the lottery and things don't go as well. When we talk about struggling, One of the things that I have seen in my work, especially in the last year, is that people are really struggling. And even with people with coping skills and tools and all of the resources, things have changed and they've lost resources. People have lost insurance, people have lost jobs, and people are really struggling. So when you're struggling, it requires a different approach to be able to manage the stress, and to be able to deal with everything to get back to a point of managing or thriving. And then we have those things where we say we're in crises. And what I always like to tell clients is when you're in crises, you do have to have different tools in your toolbox. The purpose of tools for crises is distress tolerance. So maybe in that moment, you cannot fix what the problem is, but you want to use a distress tolerance tool to be able to manage the distress and get through things as easily as possible, even though in that moment it might feel like you are drowning. Growing up, I heard all kind of myths about mental health. One of the ones that I am really glad that is shifting is that you can believe in God, go to church, and still have a therapist. Um, Growing up, that was a little taboo to have a therapist, and I have clients who came to me and said that, they were told that they're not tithing properly or they're not serving enough in the church and that's why they're having problems and it really put a strain on their faith life. And so I'm glad that that is one of the myths that is changing. You can have God and you can have a therapist. I always like to say that we go to the dentist to deal with our teeth, we go to the podiatrist to deal with our feet, and we go to a therapist to deal with our mind, and it's okay. Some of the other myths that, stress means that you're weak or you're not doing things right. And the reality is, stress is a part of how we are shaped and how we grow and how we learn. And it's something that we're all going to experience at different parts in our life. There are a lot of myths around mental health. One of the other ones that I want to highlight is that self-care is not selfish. I often hear this with clients and they'll say, well, I can't take this break or I can't schedule this or I can't do this. And the reality is, just like it says on the airplane where you have to put your mask on first, that's what self-care is. You have to put your mask on first to be able to help other people. So self-care isn't selfish. It's the way you take care of yourself to be able to serve other people. So there are a lot of stressors that people are dealing with right now. And for those of you who are in the room, feel free to drop some of those stressors in the chat. What I know is that everybody is managing something, and there are quite a few stressors. I put some on the board, but what I know is that everybody that I see in my work is trying to figure out how to navigate something, whether it's a family challenge, a financial challenge. As I just mentioned, people lost their jobs over the last year, people lost their insurance. And so these things change how you're able to navigate the world. So I put a few stresses up here. I want to highlight one, sleep deprivation. The United States is one of the most sleep deprived nations. The statistics around sleep deprivation in the United States, it just talks about how we're a culture where you're supposed to be busy, you're supposed to do this work, you're supposed to do this and have this meeting and be booked and do this. And people are not getting enough sleep. People are not resting. People are not allowing their bodies to refuel. And we as a country are sleep deprived. And that takes a toll on how you're functioning, how you're able to manage stress, your ability to show up and work and family relationships. I also want to talk about technology overload as one of the other stressors. We have had a massive boost in technology over the last years. What I see now is so different than what technology was like 20 years ago. It is constant. It is everywhere. You have it on your cell phone, you have it on a computer. It is integrated into workspaces. Technology is a huge part of how people function. Um, And we have to learn how to set boundaries around technology, how to be mindful of when we're engaging with technology too much, when we're losing touch with the real world and what happens in the real world. Technology is a good resource when used in a healthy manner, and it can also be a stressor. One of the things that I hear from kids who experience bullying is that back in the day, if you had a bully, you went home and you didn't see them until the next day, and then you dealt with it. But I hear from the kids that it is a constant barrage of post on Instagram or some of the little social media chats, or they're getting messages in, whatever they're using, but they're inundated with it 24 hours a day, which makes it difficult to put in any kind of protective barrier if there is no boundary around it. So our stressors have definitely changed over the years, and they will continue to change. And I appreciate that someone shared in the chat physical health. And absolutely, physical health, taking care of yourself, if you're taking care of someone else who has health problems, that is absolutely a stressor. And one that life may not always be kind to. Some job cultures are supportive of that and are willing to work with you, and other job cultures are not. And it puts people in a very difficult dynamic when they're trying to take care of themselves or others. So, what is stress? Stress is our body's natural reaction to a challenge. It's important to remember that stress does not mean that you are bad or that you're not doing something right. Stress is actually how we learn about ourselves, it's how we learn what we might need to do different. Stress can be acute. So maybe you're like, okay, I got a test coming up or a certification in a couple of weeks. So you're a little bit stressed over that, or it can be something chronic. I think the example that was shared in the chat is a good example. Physical health, something that can be chronic and ongoing. Um, so I want to just highlight that while stress is difficult, it is not all bad. So the stress cycle, and it's important to understand the stress cycle because you want to also be able to break it. When you have a stressor, and I'll use myself in a practical example, I was just sharing with someone that a few weeks ago, my dog had a very bad fall, and she's been in a cast ever since the fall. So they took it off and put it right back on. So we're going on about week 4 of this. So I would say that that's the stressor. When we talk about the body reaction when you have a stressor, an event, or a thought, when I first got the call that she had fallen, I honestly, to this day, I don't remember exactly what was said because I just remember seeing my dog unable to walk. So my mind immediately, it just went blank. I don't remember what was said. I just remember I got to get to the vet. My body, so sometimes our body will serve as a protective factor, and it puts distance between you and what's happening. The tension, anxiety, all of that is the bodily reaction. The emotional response. So I've been open and communicating with about the anxiety around having an injured pet. There's anxiety, there is sadness, there is fear about how her recovery process will be. So that's that emotional response. Behavior. Sometimes people lean out and isolate and lean away. I've been fortunate enough that I've had a village that has been able to support me, been able to allow me to say, what do you need help with? Having an injured dog in a frontal body cast is like having a toddler. I was telling my coworkers the other day, she woke up at 1, 3, 5, and 7. So it's like having a newborn, and she can't get around. So she really requires on me to be able to help her and support. So the behavior that I've had to enact is, instead of avoiding and trying to manage everything on my own, asking for help. But because I know what the stress cycle looks like, then I'm able to say, well, let me do something different. Instead of avoiding or isolating or catastrophizing, falling apart, I've been able to slow myself down, acknowledge that this is a stressor, and figure out how I can utilize my support to work through it. So it's very important that we understand our stress cycle. Your brain under stress. And I think this really kind of highlights what I mentioned when your brain goes into survival mode. Because as I mentioned, I remember getting the call and I don't even remember what was said to me. Your brain goes into survival mode and it's trying to process. It's trying to make sense of what is happening. That fight, flight, or freeze response activates. I also want to normalize that the fight, flight, or freeze, some people are like, yeah, I fight through it. And others are like, I freeze, I don't do anything. And all of those responses are human. They're okay. And they'll show up at different times and with different scenarios. I think what's important to remember is that when you are stressed out, it is harder to plan, it's harder to organize, it's harder to think through, harder to prioritize. And this reaction is normal. It doesn't mean you're a failure or you're not good at something. It just means that you have to figure out what you need in those moments of stress. So, if you all would like to drop some signs that you may be stressed out in the chat, I want to say that everybody's signs of stress are not the same. I have had clients who break out in rashes when they become stressed, and that's how they know that they're becoming stressed because they'll break out in a rash. So, for each individual, it is very important to know for you what might be that indicator that you're becoming stressed. It often can be seen in irritability, forgetfulness. Yesterday, I was talking to a client and it- she was rushing, and that's her sign that she's becoming stressed. And she named, I forgot this, I dropped that, I did this, and that was her indicator, like, okay, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. I need to slow down. I need to think through what I'm gonna do to kind of regroup and reset. But her indicator was like, there are a lot of little things that's going wrong, and maybe that's a sign that I need to just take a step back and reorganize. So again, the more awareness you have about what's happening and how you experience things and show up with things, then you're able to do something different. So when you have those indicators that, okay, I need to make a change, then you can make an adjustment. I also want to just share that our body is generally one of the first indicators that something is wrong. So when I mentioned that client with the rash, your body holds stress, whether you're holding it in your neck, whether you're holding it in your emotional expressions, your body will tell you that something is wrong. Sometimes we're just not paying attention to that. But the body is a good indicator of how well you're functioning. One of the other indicators that and it's a kind of a weird one, but when I'm working with clients who are in high stress environments or who may be battling depression, I'll tell them to get a plant. Um, and the reason is because the plant is a good visual of how well you're functioning. If the plant is turning colors and not watered, then there is a good chance that you're not taking the opportunity to water yourself. And that means that you might need to slow down. You might need to take a step back and figure out, okay, how do I reorganize in order to be able to take better care of myself? And I want to acknowledge in the chat, someone said they crave sweets and salty snacks when they are stressed. That is a good indicator. That's a good one. Your appetite changes, and that could be you want something or you don't have an appetite at all. So that is another good one. So I want to share this quote, and I really like this analogy because it speaks to what we're talking about today and being stronger than stress and the resilience that we need. The oak fought the wind and was broken. The willow bent when it must and survived. The oak tree is I think is one of the most gorgeous trees. They come in all shapes. They don't always grow like the one in the picture, but it's thought to be one of the strongest trees. And then we have the willow tree. And if you've ever seen a willow tree, you know that it's a little bit more fragile than the oak tree. Someone might think that the oak tree is just the only way to go, and that's the only style of engaging or the only way to navigate the world. But I introduced the willow tree because if we don't learn how to be flexible, how to pivot, how to take in our environment and see what is required of us, then we will end up in situations where we break because either we're stubborn or we refuse to make a change or we're not committed to taking care of ourselves. And so, really, the point of what this quote is saying is knowing when you need to bend in order to survive and take care of yourself. And that being firmly rooted is important, but also knowing when it's time to shift in what you're rooted in. If your plant is dying, then that means that something is not going well and it's time to bend. So I really like this quote of just a reminder that, part of what makes us strong is also being able to say that I need to bend, I need to be flexible, I need to do something different. So let's talk about what resilience is. Resilience is our capacity, and people often think that you're born with this resilience, and it is learned through experiences, challenges. It's learned through failures. So while we sometimes might think failure is bad, resilience is learned through those things that we don't get right on the first time. Resilience is how you recover. It's also our ability to adapt. So I use the word flexibility, but it's our ability to adapt, to be flexible, to pivot. And you can learn how to be more resilient. We'll often hear with kids, we'll say, well, sometimes you have to let them fall so that they can learn how to get back up. And that's just a small example of resiliency. Resilience does not mean that you avoid stress or difficult days. All of that is a part of the process. We all have difficult moments, we all have challenges, and how we respond to them helps build our resilience. It can be strengthened, and I wish that there was like a magic wand that we could wave and this was easy to do. But building resilience and navigating stress is a everyday intentional process. And we'll talk about that more. So, mental health resilience. This is how we are responding and adapting to those traumas, to those emotional situations, our behavioral flexibility, how we're dealing with pain. So it's just another component of resilience. I like to talk about the science of resilience, and I don't want to get too technical, but the only reason that I introduced this slide is because neuroscience, when we look at when scientists and neuroscientists look at actual images of the brain before and after when this research is done, the brain really rewires itself based on experiences. And one example of this is trauma. Whenever I work with a client through trauma, they'll say, well, this wasn't an issue before. What happened? And it's because the brain has rewired itself to see that now something is a trauma. And it changes how you respond to it, how you engage, your maybe fear of it. The brain is powerful and it will rewire itself to protect you. So I like to highlight that about resilience just to say that if you don't feel resilient, it's not a place to be discouraged because that can be changed. Some barriers to resilience. And again, this might look different for everyone. One of the ones that I will highlight is negative self-talk. So we all have that inner voice in our head that tells us if we're doing good or you didn't do that well enough. And sometimes our inner voice cannot be so nice. And what I tell people is navigate that inner critic and turn it around to that inner cheerleader. We get a lot of negative messages and there's a lot going on and we're taking a lot. And it's important that we have an inner voice that is uplifting, that is motivating, that is encouraging. And so if that tape recorder in your head is telling you you're not doing good enough, you didn't do that well enough, you'll never get that right, you're not worthy, It's important that you recognize that as a distortion and work to change that negative self-talk. Also, will highlight social support and isolation because usually when you're isolating, you're not using your social support system. We were not meant as humans to do life alone. We are social beings. That is one of the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is that we need social support. And so when you have a challenge, isolating takes away that use of social support. That's a barrier to resilience. When you have your village and your people who can connect with you and say, how about this perspective? Or let's take this into consideration. Or here's what I can do to take the load off. Or how can we shift this thought? That support is life-giving. And so I want to just highlight that and not isolating when we get in those moments of stress. Maybe you take 20, 30 minutes or a day, but also re-engage with those who support you and who are close to you. So why does resilience matter? Well, resilience matter because balance in our daily life is important. Resilience promotes emotional well-being. It promotes positive emotional health. It allows us to adapt and pivot a little bit quicker to know what we need in a situation. Resilience allows us to also, I use this analogy, it allows us to know what we need in the ocean. So if we're in the ocean and we're like, okay, I can either tread water, I can doggy paddle, I can float. Resilience allows us to take a step back and say, I feel like I'm drowning right now, but what do I need? What do I have with me? I don't have the life raft right now, but I can float to just give myself a little bit of a break. So resilience matters because it helps us to go through things with the least amount of distress possible. It also is, this is important, improves interpersonal relationships and our leadership capacity. We're all leaders in our own rights. We have relationships and they matter and they are part of what makes us human beings and what give us life and hope and joy. And we need resilience to be able to show up in those relationships, to be able to support others, to allow them to support us. So our ability to change and to pivot and to figure out what we need in that moment is critical for also our social connection. And you all feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer them if things come up. I appreciate you all sharing your thoughts and I'm happy again to acknowledge any questions that you drop in the chat. So how do we cultivate this resilience? As I said, resilience can be shaped, it can be nurtured. There's not one way to do that. It is a holistic approach. And as I said when I started off, I like to give people practical tools. And so that's what we'll explore over the next couple of slides. It is possible to cultivate and strengthen our resilience, and this is an everyday intentional process. So I'll transition to some of those practical skills that we don't necessarily learn in daily environments around growing our resiliency. So one of my favorite areas to talk about is boundaries. I think that most people struggle with boundaries. We might have it a little bit on the spectrum, but we could all be better with setting boundaries. So, one way that I encourage people to start setting boundaries is to look at in your life where the scale is unbalanced. So, if you're not finding time for things that you enjoy, then there's a possibility that you're taking too much on. If there's a place where you're experiencing resentment and you're find yourself a little bit more irritable, look at it and see where you might need to say, I'm not able to do that right now, or where you might need to take a break, or where you might need to look at how much you are trying to oversee or manage, and is that helpful for what you want to accomplish. Boundaries are beautiful. They are very hard to set. It is a process that will initially feel uncomfortable, but it is absolutely necessary for our own well-being. Boundaries teach us about ourselves. They teach us about others. And one of the things I like to say is that when you set boundaries with someone and they get upset, that's probably someone that you needed to set boundaries with all along. It is okay to tell someone, I noticed that every time we meet up, you're late. In the future, I won't be able to meet if we can't, adhere to the time. Or I'm uncomfortable when you raise your voice at me. We are allowed to take care of ourselves, and one of the ways that we do that is setting boundaries. I will again just say, setting boundaries is very, very hard. Um, Most of us know an extent of boundaries of good touch and bad touch, but we don't always know the boundaries around financial boundaries, which an example is that it's how we determine when someone asks us for money, or spatial boundaries, our emotional boundaries. Before you call someone and completely unload, do you say, "Hey, do you have the space or the bandwidth from what I'm carrying?" Most of us don't have a deeper understanding of boundaries. And what that does is it weakens our ability to be resilient. So I encourage everyone to set boundaries. There's a really great book on boundaries, and it's a series by Dr. Henry Cloud, and it is boundaries for leaders, boundaries with for teenagers, boundaries for dating, boundaries for just general boundaries. But his series is really, really good. It's a couple of different books, but it gives you really good insight on how to start that process of boundary setting. The role of routine. Now, I will say, I don't know if I've always been a person that valued a routine. I think as I got older, I recognized that having a routine serves a benefit. And I saw this in different aspects of life, whether the routine at work or people's personal routines. But having a routine is critical when you become stressed out. Uh, when you have a routine, first of all, you're maintaining an appropriate bedtime. It allows you to conserve your energy. A routine also means that your schedule is conducive to everything that is going on in your life. So a routine is a protective factor. And it can feel tedious. It can feel frustrating at first, like, oh, I have to stick to this. But a routine is a protective factor when it comes to being able to navigate stress. This is one area where I would challenge all of you to say, where can I add something more specific to create a routine? And whether that means going to bed at the same time of day. And this is a good example, setting a boundary is part of a routine. So I always tell my clients, especially my young clients who are obsessed with social media, I say, I don't get on social media from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. because I want to be able to focus on the day, the work day, my work with clients, what I have in front of me. But that's part of my routine that also builds structure and it sets a boundary. So think about in your daily life where you can do things to create more of a routine. Routines also help decision fatigue. I didn't know this, but I believe the founder of Apple, someone told me recently that he wore the same thing every day. And I learned that in a conversation when I recently had a client who told me that he wears the same thing every day. He has 20 blue shirts, 20 blue pair of pants, 20 blue pair of pants, and he has short sleeve, long sleeve. But what he said is, I don't have to think about what I'm going to put on. He grabs it and wears it every day. Now that might sound a little bit odd and maybe a little bit rigid, but for him, that's how he is able to create a routine. So think about in your daily lives where you can create a routine. Emotional awareness. I want to introduce the phrase emotional regulation. Emotion regulation is a part of emotional awareness. And I'm going to give a tool for those who may have kids, those who might be in working through difficult situations. One of the things that I start off every client session with is, how are you feeling? And one of the first things I do with new clients is teach them the feeling vocabulary. If you all go to Google and type in feeling wheel, there are some amazing examples of feeling wheels. Print one off. If you have a kid, print one off, put it in the car, put it around the house. Start teaching and learning the feeling vocabulary, because when you can communicate what you're feeling, then you can also get your needs met. You can regulate your emotions. You have awareness. You can respond in a way that is healthy. So we've all seen the commercial probably where it's like, do you need a Snickers? And they're like, why? And everybody around them is like, because you're not you when you're hungry. It's a comical example, but the reality is that person needs something and they're not really aware of what they need. When you are aware of your feelings, then you are also aware of how to address them. You can communicate. I felt unheard. I felt abandoned. I felt invalidated. I felt jealous. When you have that language and that feeling language, you can communicate a need, you can get that need met, but you can also regulate how you respond. You can respond instead of reacting. When you don't know what's happening internally, then you just react. It might be through anger. It might be through isolation. It might be through frustration. It might be through, snapping on someone or sending an email that you should have waited to send. But you can respond when you have that language of emotions and what's going on internally, and you can respond in a way that is healthy. Our next tool to build and increase that resiliency is flexibility. One of the things that I learned early on is that life is truly every day a spontaneity test. You can try to plan, prepare, organize, leave on time, and there will still be something that throws a wrench in your plans. Life is truly a spontaneity test. And those who can pivot and be flexible tend to be able to respond to that test better. I want to be clear that resilience is not just pushing past, pushing through, not just fighting through it. Resilience is a process of growth. It's a process of acknowledgement. It's a process of change and awareness. It's cultivating a process to be able to appropriately and deal and manage stress and deal with it in a way that is healthy, but also limits the distress that you're feeling. Flexibility is hard. People have the way they like things to go. They have their shoulds. You should do this. This should happen this way. Flexibility and being able to pivot is critical to resilience. We have to be able to know, and going back to the example I started off with the oak tree, you have to be able to know when it's time to bend, when it's time to say, you know what, this route that I've been driving is not working. The way I've been approaching this is not helpful or healthy, and I have to do something different. And all the tools I'm giving you integrate, because when you have that emotional language and you're checking in with yourself and saying, what do I need? What's happening? How am I feeling? Then you can also take in that data and say, okay, I'm finding myself irritated. What's driving the irritation? What thought is driving it? Okay, I don't have to be rigid in this plan. I can interject flexibility to try to do something different. So this is another area where I would encourage people to look at and see, where have you not been flexible, and has that hurt you, or has that been helpful? Is it some way that you can adjust it? Um, we don't want to be too porous, but I also think that sometimes we can be so committed to something that it puts us in a cycle of suffering, and that's unhealthy. And again, I just want to remind you all, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. I'll be happy to respond to them. Someone asked, will the slides be available for personal reference once the Zoom is done? I had not sent the slides, but I'm happy to share or answer any questions from the slides. If there's information that you would like from the slides, I'm also happy to share that. Another tool to resilience and to managing daily stress is saying no. And I don't know about you all, but I will have to admit, sometimes I have difficulty saying no, especially if it's something that I'm like, oh, well, I can reasonably do this. But what I'm also learning is even though I can reasonably do something, does that mean that I need to do that and add that to my plate, add that to my day, add that to my schedule? And I'll give a good example. This actually happened yesterday. I love, love, love doing psychoeducation work. It's truly part of my passion in mental health. And someone asked me, they said, can you come and speak at this event next Thursday at 12 o'clock? I know it's in the middle of the day. And my immediate response was to say, yes, absolutely. And I said, well, I'm learning because my colleagues also hold me accountable. I said, well, let me ask some more questions. So I asked them some more questions. I said, well, what's the location? What is the parking dynamic? And how long would I speak? And so once I got all those answers, I said, well, how can I assist you with this, but also do it in a way that doesn't completely derail my day? I was going to have to try to drive 45 minutes in the middle of the day and only to speak for 15 to 20 minutes. So I would counsel all these clients before and after to try to get to this, which I value and value the work, but I also recognize that it was not necessarily feasible in the capacity that it was being asked. So I said, well, hey, why don't we, if there's an option for me to do it by Zoom, I'm more than happy to do it. And that's me learning that sometimes no is figuring out if this works for you, and if it doesn't, how can you engage in a different way? No is slowing down. No is asking for more details. No is a full sentence. I didn't say no in this case, but I integrated everything that I've talked to you all about. Flexibility, Zoom. I'm happy to talk, but can we try it by Zoom? I set a boundary. I would have to counsel a couple of clients that does not seem like a good idea to speak for 15 to 20 minutes. So I set that boundary. But I advocated for myself. I communicated, and these are all things that we do to help in our process to be able to navigate things. Saying no is hard, especially to people we love, especially to people we value, to relationships that matter to us. But we have to look at where can we take better care of ourselves. And sometimes it does require us to say no. We say no to be able to manage our own schedules, to be able to take care of our physical health, our emotional well-being, our priorities, to maintain those boundaries that I talked about, like those financial boundaries. So when we honor ourselves through boundaries and saying no, that's one of the ways that, again, that our resilience grows. Um, get comfortable with no. I will give clients the assignment of saying no to something simple, and if it feels uncomfortable, notice it. But too often we're saying yes and we are disadvantaged because we're not thinking about what is involved in the yes. And so going back to that example I provided, if I would have immediately said yes, it's a possibility that I might have been frustrated when I showed up. I've prepared this long presentation and only speaking for 15 or 20 minutes. I've counseled clients on the front end and the back end, and I really tried to honor client sessions in that time. So part of our no is also slowing down and seeing how we show up in different environments. And we can do that when we have that awareness. Personal resilience plan. When I think about a personal resilience plan, this does not look one way. It actually looks different for everybody. Um, it requires you to take a step back, sit with yourself, kind of check in and see. what's going well and what actually is not going the way I would like it to? Where do I find myself complaining about the same thing over and over? Where am I, constantly frustrated? Is it something that I keep messing up on? Do I find myself repeatedly triggered by something? What's happening in my own environment? Because that's usually the first indicator of what you need to change to start creating your personal resilience plan. Some ways that you can do this, go to coping skills. Like, what are the things that you can immediately do or try or engage in that help you de-escalate, help you de-stress? So for me, I have a process in the morning. I start off with gospel music. I light candles because the scent is helpful for me. And I encourage clients to create their morning routine. And I will tell them if they'll say, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Get back in the bed. Imagine yourself getting back in the bed if you can. But how you start that morning is going to determine how the rest of the day goes. So I'm very intentional about the start of my morning. I allow myself to have quiet time. I have a sister who doesn't take calls before a certain time. And I value that as I can't necessarily put that in place, but she doesn't take calls before 10 a.m. because she said if I have a difficult interaction before 10 a.m., it shaped the rest of my day before I've allowed any kind of like buffer to be put in place. And so I understood that it's part of that morning routine. So think about what you need as a go-to coping skill. Is it music? Is it art? Is it nature? I have on their phone a friend. Who can you call and they'll be able to give you an encouraging word? Or do you have that person that you can call that can pray for you or that will send you a positive post or something that they've seen? I think knowing your triggers for stress is also incredibly important. Your triggers for stress, your triggers for anxiety, triggers for depression, knowing your triggers in general. If you know that, okay, someone raising their voice at you makes you anxious, then you have to put a tool in place for that coworker who always yells or for that manager who always yells. If the winter months, and this is a practical example that I have with clients, the winter months can be really hard for people. It's gloomy, it's dark, it's cold. We had an especially brutal winter this year, and I had to readapt and readjust my plans that I created with clients because what we had decided for past winters didn't work in this winter when we had 12, 13 inches of snowcrete and people were stuck in their houses and their cars were stuck. But because they know that that's a trigger, they work to create a plan to manage it. So knowing your triggers is incredibly important. It's okay to be honest that you might be triggered by something or bothered by something or something makes you more vulnerable. We're human, and that's a part of what makes us human. I also love the idea of scheduling wellness days. What I'm seeing now more and more is that parents are giving their children mental health days. People are taking mental health days. And oftentimes people think that a sick day means that you have to be doing poorly. I am of the notion that a sick day can also be taken so that you don't get to a point where you're doing poorly. If you recognize, hey, I'm overwhelmed. I always tend to get overwhelmed around the anniversary of my husband's passing, or, this date is triggering for me. Schedule a wellness day. Don't wait to the point where you're doing bad to schedule that day. It's okay to take care of yourself before you start having a difficult moment. Daily self-care habits, and I cannot stress self-care enough. Self-care, self-care, self-care. And this goes back to what we hear when you fly on an airplane and they say, when the oxygen mask drops, you have to put yours on first before you try to take care of someone else or put theirs on. Self-care is a daily process. It's not selfish. And what self-care means is that we are intentionally trying to take care of ourselves, how we function. Are we getting enough sleep? So sleep hygiene is critical. Am I getting enough sleep? What are my meals? What are my meals like? What's my food intake? Am I taking the opportunity to eat healthy meals? Am I always rushing? Am I eating on the go? What am I doing to refuel when I'm giving so much to everybody else? And self-care does not have to be trips or, days to the spa. Self-care could be going outside and playing basketball. It could be taking a walk. It could be walking around the neighborhood and looking at the flowers or, putting on some music and having a dance party. I encourage everyone to identify a few things that you can do that can shift your mood. If you're preparing for a job interview or preparing to have a difficult conversation, or you're a caregiver, or you're an overwhelmed parent, or you're navigating a work environment that's difficult, look at what's happening and put a plan in place for self-care. When I talk to you all about my morning routine, when I get to my office, one of the first things I do is put my diffuser on. And I usually let the first client of the day pick the scent. But, I might pick rose or I might pick lavender. My diffuser puts scent in the space, which sets the tone. I have a cool, clean office. I have plants in my office. I have comfortable furniture and bright colors. All of this is a part of my intentional practice of self-care. I hear a lot in my work as a clinician, and I want to be able to manage everything that people bring to me. And so to do that, I have to make sure that I'm setting boundaries. I have to make sure that I have tools in place. I also have to make sure I'm practicing self-care. So that morning routine is part of my self-care. Lighting a candle is part of my self-care. Self-care is daily and it is intentional. So I provided just a few tools for your toolbox. And this is not an exhaustive list. It's just the few things that I kind of like to highlight, but there are so many more tools that you all can add to your toolbox. A heart smile list is it's a quick like little notes app where you can write and jot down things that when you read it, it'll make you smile. Like, oh, that one time was sent flowers, or that book that I was given that really just makes me happy. Um, so creating a list of the things that really make your heart smile. One of the other things that I like is the gratitude jar or journal. And I actually got this idea from a client. They were working to shift their focus through depression. And when you're depressed, you can really see the negative. And so what they said is I had to, in order to try to not see the negative, I started trying to find the positive in every day. And so my client got a jar and every day wrote something down positive and put it in the jar. And in the moments where they felt overwhelmed or experienced a surge of negative emotions, then they were able to take those notes out the jar and read them as a means of kind of refueling and re-energizing. So I really like the idea of a gratitude jar or a gratitude journal. I've also that's something where you can put it in a notes app and just say, you know what, today it didn't rain, or it was 80 degrees, or I got my favorite smoothie. We get so much negativity in the world that it's important to be able to also focus on the positive. One of my other favorite tools is your happy image or guided imagery. So a happy image is something that just immediately, when you think about it, it makes you smile. So for little kids, they often tell me like ice cream cone, or they'll say their favorite toy because when they think about it, it immediately makes them smile. For adults, it might be something different. Maybe it's a bunny rabbit or a picture of a grandparent or something, somewhere that you visited. But what we see through research is that when you can just hold that image, it helps reduce the stress, it helps reduce the tension, it helps reduce the anxiety. And this is a tool that's free. You don't have to carry anything around. You can just recall that image in a moment of tension or a moment of anxiety or a moment of frustration to be able to help you reset and regroup. Guided imagery is a more extensive process, but I really like guided imagery because, again, it's something that's free. You don't have to carry it around. And what guided imagery involves is using all five senses to imagine being somewhere. And so for me, my happy place is the beach. My happy image is the beach, and my happy place that I go to in guided imagery is the beach. And so when I'm in rush hour traffic in DC and navigating the roundabouts that give me so much anxiety, I use guided imagery and I think about the relaxing waves on the beach. So that's what I see. I see the ocean. What do I hear? I hear the waves. They're crashing. What do I smell? I might smell the salt water. What do I hear? I might hear seagulls, but I also hear the waves crashing. I hear people running and playing and laughing. What do I taste? Well, if I'm in Ocean City, maybe I'm having French fries or, a funnel cake, but we're drawing in all of our senses to be able to help manage the stress, manage the tension, and for just a moment be able to lower the negativity that we're experiencing. And again, I love that tool because it doesn't require us to drag around a big book or go anywhere. We can do that sitting in a difficult meeting. We can do it driving in traffic. So it's a great tool. I've also referenced getting a plant several times. Getting a pet is not for everybody, so another option is getting a plant. Again, plants are a good indicator of when you may not be doing well. I'm encouraging all adults to get hobbies, to find something to do for play, to find a project. I know that we are all incredibly busy. We are all managing a lot. We are all have busy schedules. And if we take a look and see like where's my time going through, then we can probably find places where we're not managing our time as well, or we are avoiding because we're overworked, we're burnt out, we're stressed out, and so we're just like, I'm not going to do anything, and then we lose a whole afternoon. So I'm encouraging all of my adult clients to start building play into the day. And if it's not the day, the week, what are you doing to make yourself laugh, to create those light moments, to create those opportunities to smile? Um, we often have that as children, but as we get older, we don't play. We don't necessarily engage in hobbies. We don't have projects or tasks that we find engaging and nourishing. And so look at where you can build in something that's fun. If it's a coloring book or again, learning how to play tennis. I'm gonna start learning how to sew, and that's something that to a lot of people might sound stressful, but I'm like, that's a good hobby. It's something that's relaxing because I need to also make sure that I have an outlet from all of the work that I do. So these are just a few tools that I provide, but I want you all to be intentional about creating the tools for your toolbox. This idea of stress management and building resilience, it does not happen overnight. It is not easy. I mean, all this I'm saying it sounds like okay, I can do that. But it does take intentionality. It takes time. It takes patience. It also takes re-engaging the process and saying, okay, I did this well, but maybe I can do this a little bit different next month to just help lower the stress even more and create that resiliency. And these are some resources that I'll make sure these are shared. I also want to just highlight that the resources are not race specific. So even though it says therapy for Black girls, there are all kind of therapists on there. A man can utilize that site. These are just some of the resources that I recommend when people are trying to find therapy. One that I don't have on here, and oh, I do have it, NAMI. NAMI is a great website. It has so much information. It's nationwide. If you have someone who is struggling or having a difficult time, NAMI has so many great resources on it. So my call to action to you all take care of yourself. We are battling a lot in the world right now. We are all trying to navigate things as best as we can. Many people are stressed. We are all trying to do the best in a situation that for many of us, it feels frightening, it feels scary, it feels foreign. So I want to encourage you to take care of yourself. Uh, think about where you need to change and what you need to do differently. Change can feel really hard. It can be frightening. Um, I'm one of those people who actually I don't like change unless I decide that something is going to change. And I have to talk myself through that. Change is not always bad. And when it occurs and it's not something that we're in favor of, how do we lean into it? So look at your life and your schedule and your routine and your relationships and what you're prioritizing and see where you need to make a change. I can't stress this enough. Self-care. So that's all I'll say is self-care. Build and utilize your support system. One of the things I like about the website I mentioned, NAMI, is that there are so many great free resources, all kinds of groups. I hear people say a lot of times, I don't really have people that I can rely on or people that I can trust. And so we have to be appropriately creative to build and utilize our support system. I want people to not be afraid to seek support. If there is something that's challenging you or you're struggling with, seek support. And I gave a presentation last week and I said, I recognize that everybody is not ready for therapy. Therapy is a very challenging and vulnerable process. And sometimes people are not ready for therapy, and that's okay. But maybe you can get a mentor or you can seek out a circle, a sister circle, or a support group. There are all kind of men's groups where you can go to for a little bit of support and accountability. So there is not one way that support looks like. But it might require you to say, okay, I'm not quite ready for therapy, but I'm going to try to find somebody in my field who I can learn from, or I'm going to find a couple that we trust to ask questions to. So seek support. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Asking for help is human. It's also important to prioritize your well-being. Um, I can't say enough about everything that we're carrying. I started off with those stressors. We're all managing a lot, and we have to prioritize taking care of ourselves to be able to wear all the different hats, whether it's mom, dad, employee, caregiver, supervisor, leader, CEO, foreman. We all are carrying and wearing different hats. And in order to be able to do what we're doing in a healthy way, we have to make sure that we're prioritizing our well-being. So every presentation I do, I dedicate it to someone. As I started off, this is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so this presentation is dedicated to Ruth, Leonard, and Joy and all those navigating mental health issues. May you continue to find strength in vulnerability, hope in difficult moments, and support in the people who walk alongside you. If you all know someone who is struggling with mental health, encourage them to seek support. Normalize for them that mental health is health. We all struggle with it. We all have challenges. They're not alone. They're not foreign. It's not something wrong with them. But mental health is part of our human experience. Our mental health and wellness is part of our human experience. And they don't have to suffer in silence. They don't have to isolate themselves. They don't have to do it alone. So I appreciate you all for joining me today. I want to stop and check in the chat. If there's something that I said that I can elaborate on, I'm happy to elaborate. And I will make sure that I send the slides so that you all can utilize the slides and utilize the resources on the slide. But I'll also just take a time if there are any questions that anyone wants to drop in the chat. I am happy to answer them. And I really do appreciate you all joining me. It's been a wonderful opportunity to share this information with you all. Again, as I said, I enjoy doing this work. Thank you all for the positive feedback in the comments. I appreciate all that. And as I mentioned again, I will sh share the slides with you all. Everyone have a good night and thank you for joining. So someone asked the question, is it possible for someone to be a stressor and be the person you love at the same time? I think that's actually a really good question because people are not one dimensional. We are all imperfect. We all make mistakes. And what I would say, if you feel like someone is a stressor and the person you love, it might be a place where you set boundaries. And I want to just say this in grace. Oftentimes when parents come to me, they say, I love my kids and I'm stressed out trying to parent. And I normalize that two things can be true. And so to your point of in that question, two things can be true. Someone and that dynamic can feel stressful and you also love that person. And so it would be helpful to sit and look at where do I need to set more boundaries around this relationship? Am I managing my expectations about this person? Is this a dynamic that I need to continue to engage or be involved in? So again, I think that's a place where you can continue to be curious and see what data am I taking in from this dynamic. Obviously, if it's a kid, then you can't just give the kids away. You got to try to work through that. But you can also say, well, maybe I'm not setting enough structure for them. I'm not giving them enough responsibility. I have unreasonable expectations of myself as a parent. If it's an adult, again, looking at the in the same vein of what do I need to do to change this relationship to either make it healthier or to not engage in it at all? That's a very good question. I appreciate you all's engagement today and all of your questions. Again, I will put my email in the chat. Oh, well, they're going to share the slides. So you have my email if you would like to reach out and ask any questions. I'm always happy to answer questions and to share information. Um, if there's anything that comes up that you're curious about, I love to educate and share. So feel free to reach out. And you all have a good night. I don't think there are any more questions. I don't see any. So you all have a good night.